Today, we're going to be talking about the illegal drug trade here in the United States, and especially the problem that's presented through fentanyl crossing over from our southern border and from the cartels down in Mexico, and where they're getting it from, even and manufacturing it. All of that today. And joining us today, we have a special guest, Nate Janning, who works here in Reno. And Nate, why don't you introduce yourself and share a little bit of your background with our listeners, if you don't mind.
Sure. Again, my name is Nate Janning. I work with the Regional Narcotics Unit. I work for one of our local law enforcement agencies. I've been doing that for coming up on 4 years. Been working in law enforcement for just shy of 12 years. Started down in San Diego with the police department down there.
Okay.
4 years down there, and then I came up here and moved up with my family to Nevada to get out of some of the issues like what we're going to talk about here. I wanted to raise a family away from some of the crises that they're presented with down there.
Yeah.
Came up here. I also work with one of our local SWAT teams, and I'm an instructor with several different disciplines in law enforcement, including range, CPR, some of the medical fields and practices.
That's awesome. Nate, thank you for being with us today on our podcast. And I just want to thank you for what you do. I appreciate what you do in our community, and I'm thankful for men like you that are out there, and men and women like you that are out there working in our community. So thank you for that. Now, as I understand it, China is providing the ingredients to the drug cartels to produce fentanyl in Mexico that is then coming into the United States market. Is that correct? Can you walk us through maybe some of the process of where these are coming from?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Historically, the Mexican cartels, and in our area specifically, it's the Sinaloa cartel, by and large, they historically have been trafficking primarily methamphetamine, fentanyl, and marijuana up into the United States because those were the biggest money makers for them down in Mexico. However, recently we have seen that the heroin trade has taken a big hit because of the introduction of fentanyl, which is up to 100 times more powerful than heroin is. And they originally were getting the fentanyl itself shipped over from China and then bringing it up across the southern borders. Okay. But as of recently, we now know that they have super labs down in Mexico. They're getting a lot of the precursor ingredients from China, which is the chemicals used to make fentanyl. Mm-hmm. They're getting those shipped over from China. Now they can actually make the fentanyl itself down in Mexico and then smuggle it across the border. Wow,
that's amazing. I did not know all of that. Now, is the Sinaloa cartel, is that a province there in Mexico or like a state in Mexico that that's their territory and that's where they get their name from?
Yes, that's where the name comes from originally. They have branched out much bigger than their original, how they started, obviously. They've become much bigger than that, but that's where the name originally originated from, yes.
And they're obviously just in this to make a bunch of money, right? And get rich because they don't care that they're destroying people's lives.
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, explain how the illegal aliens come into this process as they come across the border. What's the connection there?
So human trafficking is a big issue with the cartels as well. The coyotes that bring the illegal immigrants up through non-standard means, like outside of our actual border crossings. Okay. Incredibly dangerous. Many people die doing that. A lot of the immigrants will die trying to cross the borders because it's very rough terrain they're trying to cross. Yeah. Largely, we don't see too much of at least we don't catch, I should say, too much of the illicit narcotics coming through with the illegal aliens. Mm-hmm. A lot of it actually comes through our checkpoints and through our legal passageways through the border.
Wow.
That could be statistically skewed a little bit because we catch the drugs coming through our ports of entry far more often than we do catch the illegal immigrants that are coming through like just our unprotected borders where we don't have the passageways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then a quick question. So I actually remember getting on a plane in Southern California to fly back to Reno, and there in our aisle was a young man from Honduras. And he didn't have a passport, didn't have an ID, didn't have anything, just had some papers. And we're like, man, how were you able to do this? And he said, well, I was processed through. They put me on this plane. They're sending me to Texas. And he then proceeded to share his story. And it had taken him over a year because he came up once and then got sent back. And then he came up again. But he was just recounting to us the dangers of this journey that he was taking, and not only his danger, but the things that he was witnessing on the way that were happening to other people. I mean, he himself was robbed several times. There was some of the in one area, a cartel actually exploited him for super cheap labor in order for him to work to earn enough to gain a passage across the border. And it just sounded like a really harrowing, dangerous experience. And would you say that's pretty much the case for most of these people that are coming across the U.S. border? That it's a really dangerous process for them and what they face?
Yes, of course. Excuse me. The cartel doesn't do anything for free.
Yeah.
Right? They're in it to make the money. And if you can't pay outright for that border crossing, that illegal border crossing, they'll find a way to make you work to get money out of you so that they can make their money from you for providing that service to them. Yeah. And a lot of that is going to be being forced into some sort of labor, either down in Mexico in the super labs themselves prior to crossing, or when they come across, sometimes they will be placed in roles where they are not smuggling the drugs themselves, but they are in the logistical network of moving the drugs around the United States once they have them stateside.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about some of the statistics surrounding fentanyl, and just what do you know? What can you tell us about fentanyl? The strength of it, the commonality of it. Is it replacing all these other drugs now, and is it becoming the drug of choice? And what does it do to somebody if they get hooked on this stuff?
So I wouldn't say it's replacing anything besides other opiates, other narcotics, such as heroin. Heroin was the big illicit narcotic or opiate that we saw nationwide. Heroin has largely fallen off here in Washoe County. I can tell you that we don't hardly see heroin at all anymore. And if you think about it, it just comes down to, like I said before, they're in it to make money. They're a business. The cartels are. If you think about it, when you are crossing the border with something that's illegal, if you can bring over an ounce of fentanyl and then cut that ounce of fentanyl with something like mannitol or some of these other chemicals that are not inherently dangerous for us, but it increases the weight and increases the yield of their product. They can bring 1 ounce of fentanyl over and cut it 100 times with mannitol and have a product the same strength or similar to heroin, but the only thing they had to get across the border was 1 ounce, as opposed to having to move 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 pounds of heroin across the border. So it makes it much easier. The fentanyl, because it's so compact and it's so powerful, it's much easier to get across the border and much harder for us to find and detect. Somebody who has gotten the hooks of fentanyl have gotten into them. The things to look out for are going to be, they're going to start withdrawing from everyday life. They're going to withdraw from their friends. They're going to withdraw from their jobs because this chemical, it overtakes your brain. It overtakes your urges. It overtakes everything about you to where it becomes the number one most important thing in your life. And so you'll start setting your family, your job, your work, your hobbies, everything that you once loved, that will start going to the back burner because you are constantly seeking this drug now. So one of the primary things to be watching out for with fentanyl is going to be that withdrawal from things. If you know somebody who loves snowboarding and they're just not interested anymore and they sit at home all day now, not saying that that is the case, because there's a bunch of other things that could be a factor in this, but one of those could possibly be some sort of drug addiction.
Warrants looking into if you're concerned for your friend, right? Now, how would people like me or everyday people in our audience, how would we come across fentanyl in our community? What would that look like? Is it a pill? Is it powder? Is it all of the above?
So everyday people, it's not that you're not going to come across it unless you're seeking it. By and large.
So you got to be seeking this out.
Correct.
It's not going to be laying around, or you're not going to find it in a common area. You have to be looking for this specifically.
Yes, that's correct. If you are an illicit drug user, fentanyl has found its way into everything. We're seeing fentanyl mixed in and cut into meth. It's mixed into, we've found marijuana that has actually had fentanyl that's been kind of sprinkled into it, mixed into it, PCP. It's really kind of worming its way into all of these different drugs. And the danger of that, obviously, is that somebody who uses a stimulant such as methamphetamine or cocaine, but doesn't use a narcotic, analgesic, or an opiate, they're not going to have that. Their body's not going to be adjusted and ready to process that drug,
Yeah.
and the dangers of an overdose are increased exponentially by that, especially when they don't know that's what they're consuming.
Wow. So it's extremely dangerous then.
Yes.
What can somebody do if there is, if anybody's listening and, a family member, something consumes this, what are some ways to get them help that you know of?
Most immediately, Narcan,
Okay,
which is probably
Narcan.
a drug that it's been in the mainstream media because of the fentanyl epidemic.
Yep.
Narcan is going to be
the emergency responders carry that now on them, I believe. Right?
correct. Yeah, all of the agencies here in Washoe County are now issued out Narcan and trained on how to use it.
Okay.
We just use a nasal, excuse me, a nasal administration route. It's just a nasal spray, similar to like your, if you have bad allergies and you use Flonase or something like that.
Yeah.
It's very similar to that.
Okay. Now, going back to where you find this stuff, I saw a picture of a bag of these little, it almost looked like Skittles. They were colored, and I don't know if that was something you've seen or come across, but it was, I think it was around the Halloween time frame, and they were saying you need to be watching out whatever your kids are getting for candy. You need to be watching what they're consuming because this is getting passed around. Is that a true? Have you seen anything like that?
Of course, I'm never going to tell you not to be careful with what your children are consuming.
Yeah.
That being said, the chances of you having a fentanyl pill in a bag of Skittles are going to be infinitesimally small.
Okay.
The way that fentanyl initially came into our country was in the M30 pill form, which they were pressing the fentanyl into pills that we call M30s because that is the stamps that were on the pills. And that is the stamp that matches for an oxycodone, which is an opiate similar to fentanyl. It's just much, much less strong. It's much weaker than fentanyl is. And it's prescribed by doctors for pain relief, largely with like terminally ill patients because the 30 milligram dose of oxycodone is quite high. They were matching those pills and trying to disguise as those pills so that they could try to avoid detection by law enforcement. That is initially how they came across. Since then, they moved on briefly to that rainbow color that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Same pill, same stampings, but now they were colored all different colors in a bag, like it looked like the rainbow.
Okay.
The media got a hold of that, and it has actually had a positive impact that the media started putting that out there to the public because it created this issue for the cartels. Again, going back to the fact that they're just a business. That's what they are.
Right.
Now, their business is violence and drugs largely, but they are a business.
Yeah.
And they don't want that negative media coverage.
Yeah.
They don't want to be in the limelight. They don't want to be in the spotlight because that hurts their business.
Their profits. Right. Yeah.
So now they have transitioned. We don't see the pills very much anymore. Now it's a compressed powder that's coming across.
Yeah. So talking about our border, just touching on that issue there, we need to secure our border. We need to work with Mexico. We need to work with other countries. What are some ideas that maybe you might have to maybe serve as more of a deterrent for all these illegal aliens that are trying to flood into our country that are then in turn being used and exploited by the cartels to bring across their product? What are some of the ideas that you might have to help with that situation?
Well, I'll put it into perspective for you. When COVID hit, obviously when COVID hit, we shut down our borders because we were trying to control the spread of the pandemic. When we shut down our borders, we saw the price increases for drugs in Washoe County here in our community increase threefold.
Wow.
An ounce of methamphetamine, which was going for $200, was then $600 or $700 because the supply had gotten so low that supply and demand shift. Now all of a sudden there's no supply, but there's still demand. We were paying $600-$700 for an ounce of methamphetamine at that time. So closing the border worked.
Yeah.
If we do close the border, if we get a handle on the border crisis, it is going to affect the influx of drugs, and it's going to affect the ability of people to get a hold of them here in the United States.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. That's good information. One other, just shifting gears a little bit, what are some ways that you feel like, because I know you said you kind of grew up a Catholic, but then now you're not really practicing or anything right now, but what would you like to see from the church or even the Catholic Church and the Christian churches working together in our community? What are something that we could do to help make an impact for good?
That is an excellent question. One of the things that I get asked quite frequently is, You know, there's that rule of there's 6 degrees of separation between every person. I don't know if it's in the world or in the United States, but there's only 6 degrees of separation between us. Everybody knows somebody that's suffering from addiction, whether it's openly and outwardly or not.
Right.
And the question typically is, what can I do to help them, to support them, to get them past this and to get them through this?
Yes.
And unfortunately, from where I sit and from what I see, there's not much you can do. Especially with fentanyl, because the hooks go so deep and it becomes a physiological need for this drug.
Yeah.
The only thing that I have seen truly work to get somebody out of the throes of addiction is hitting that rock bottom and realizing I need to change something, or this is my lifestyle, or I'm going to die. And that moment is what's critical to save these people. You can provide all the services in the world, but unfortunately, from where I'm sitting and just in my personal experience, if they haven't experienced that rock bottom yet, and they don't have that perspective, then a lot of the times, a large percentage of the time, unfortunately, recovery just doesn't stick until they have that perspective of, if I go down this path, this is where it leads.
Right. Yeah. I often describe that as an internal pressure that is greater than all the external pressures that are coming, at you. And, obviously from a Christian perspective and as a pastor, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of Jesus Christ and the salvation that he brings and the forgiveness of sins and all that is critical as well. But you're right, until a person is ready to completely, to recognize, man, my life is in the balance here. This is life and death, and that internal pressure and desire to live becomes greater than the outward pressures to cave in and to use that drug and to follow that addiction. You're right. In my experience as a pastor, that I've seen the same thing. People don't get out of that until they reach rock bottom, and no one can help them at that point. They have to want it for themselves. It's really important.
It turns into a solo journey, unfortunately, until they're ready to accept that.
Yeah. That's good for, I think, maybe some parents to hear too, because in my experience, I see a lot of people trying to help, and sometimes the help is not always the best way to do things. Unfortunately, it's sad to say that. I mean, not that we should stop trying, but until that person gets to the rock bottom themselves, I like what you said there. I think that's when the switch happens and they suddenly go, you know what, I want to live, and in order to live, I got to beat this. So,
I remember there was a story, and unfortunately I cannot remember the details of it, but I think it was something along the lines of there was a man lost at sea, and he was praying to get back to land, and then God sends 3 different outlets of a way for him to get back to land.
I've heard this story.
And he turns them all away, and then he ends up perishing, meets God up at the pearly gates and says, I asked and I asked and I asked, well, why didn't you help me? And he said, well, I sent you 3. I sent you a cruise ship that came by. You didn't want it. I sent you this. I sent you that. You didn't take me up on any of my offers. I tried. So until they're ready to accept those offers, unfortunately, it's on them.
You're right. Well, thank you very much for your expertise and just what you shared today. I know that our listeners will find this helpful, and it's been a great conversation for me too. So thank you for coming on, and we'll be praying for you guys and all you guys that are out there in your unit and working here in our city and our state. We really appreciate you guys, and I'm thankful for you. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.